Today we're going to take a look at how you can successfully gather news and information through interviews. I've uploaded several PDF documents to Edmodo, so be sure to download those into Notability so you can take notes, follow along, and complete your homework at the end of this video. Once you begin conducting interviews, you will quickly see that your source or sources can easily become the most important and essential elements of your news story. These sources can provide you with a myriad of different resources. You can expect your sources to provide you with basic factual information, as well as perspective and context on the topic being discussed. When interviewing any source, you should be sure to take precise notes so you can later use direct quotes when compiling your news story or news article. Your sources can also provide you with ideas on how to best approach the story. Remember, if you've chosen to interview this person, they are probably closely connected to the story, so be sure to listen to their unique perspective. And even if your interview doesn't go so well, and some of them won't, remember that one source can always lead to another source. So remember to always be respectful of the people you are interviewing. They're giving up their time to provide you with information you didn't already have. As a representative of Mercy Academy and a member of the WJAG news team, you should always show up on time, thank your sources, and be prepared. First of all, you are welcome for the most awesome transition ever. And secondly, let's talk about how you can make sure you are best prepared for an interview. As soon as you are assigned a news story or news article, you should begin to research that topic. In fact, your research might even begin well before you schedule an interview. I completely understand that research seems like a step that is a little boring and is something that you might be able to skip. But you have to remember that any background information you bring to your interview is going to give you a lot more credit as a reporter. And any research you have going into the interview is going to make that whole process a lot more simple. So, before you speak to anyone or conduct any interviews, make sure you've completed some good, thorough research. You can use journals, encyclopedias, other news articles, but make sure you stay away from sites like Wikipedia and Google. The information on those sites is always changing and can be manipulated by nearly anyone. Use your best judgment, and if you're ever in doubt, don't be afraid to ask someone else for their opinion. A lot of what we are going to do this year in mass media and technology is going to deal with collaboration and working together as a class. Just remember as you research and compile your stories and news articles that you remember the difference between collaboration and plagiarism. Collaboration is working together, bouncing ideas off of each other, brainstorming, that sort of thing. Plagiarism is writing an article for someone else or producing a news story for someone else. So again, be aware of the difference between those two things. Know that I fully support collaboration, but plagiarism is totally against the rules. Once you complete your research, you'll begin developing questions for your interview. Creating these questions in advance is a huge part of being prepared and most effectively using your time with your source. You should develop a list of questions that will help you remember the key concepts and points that you would like to address as you are interviewing your source. Be sure to write open-ended questions because yes and no answers do not make for an interesting interview. As you're conducting your interview, you may think of more questions that you'd like to discuss with your source. As he or she is talking, simply make a note of your follow-up question and ask them later or at the appropriate time. Never be afraid to ask a follow-up question. We can always edit those out if we need to, but the more information we can gather, the better. Once you have completed quality research and have created some thought-provoking questions, you've got all you need for a perfect interview and a happy teacher. When conducting an interview, there are several things that you want to consider. First, you want to make sure you carefully consider the setting of your interview. Regardless of whether you're interviewing a person for our newspaper or for a news story on WJAG, you want to make sure you film the person or record the person in a setting where they're most comfortable. Not only does this make your source feel more at ease, but it will also help you as a reporter to gather personal information about this person. For example, if they're a hoarder, you can get an idea of what their house looks like. Or if they are a doctor, you can make note of the different degrees on their wall or their specializations, that sort of thing. So as you're scheduling interviews, compiling research, and creating your questions, be sure to consider the location and the setting of your interview. Make sure you clear it with your source, and make sure that you're available to visit that specific location. And do your best to use common sense. Sometimes your source or sources will not be comfortable bringing you into their personal space, or a scheduling conflict might not allow you to be in their personal space. So, when choosing a neutral setting, make sure that it makes sense. For example, if you were interviewing a science teacher, you wouldn't film him or her in a Spanish classroom surrounded by piñatas. Same thing, you wouldn't interview an English teacher in a math classroom. You don't want to put someone in a space where he or she is uncomfortable or where things don't seem to correlate. Once you've chosen your location, you want to make sure that your story or your questions cover the 5 W's and the H. That's who, what, where, when, why, and how. These 6 questions are essential to any news story. Once you meet your source to begin conducting the interview, it's important that you establish a rapport with him or her. That simply means that you should build a relationship with the person before you begin asking questions. Try to find out who your source is as a person outside of this story. Ask them about their hobbies, compliment them on their appearance. If you're meeting in a setting that is personal to them, ask them about photographs that are around, or compliment them on the decor. Once you're able to have a natural conversation with your source, they're going to feel more at ease as they answer your questions about your news story. Remember, your source or sources are people. Keep the conversation between you and them as natural as possible. You'll notice that your interviews are more genuine when you have that established rapport and are able to maintain a more natural relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee. As I mentioned earlier, you might think of questions as you're speaking to your source. Remember, it's okay to ask your source questions that you think of on the spot, and it's okay for the source to take the interview in a totally different direction. You have to be prepared for your interviews, but you also have to be flexible. Be sure to maintain control of the interview. If your source begins to ramble or gets off topic, gently lead them into another question. Of course, we can always cut down and edit interviews, but we don't want to waste your time or the time of your source. As you're wrapping up your interview, Make sure you ask your source if there's anything that they would like to discuss that you didn't cover. This is also a great time to ask them to define any terms that they might have used that you didn't understand. Don't be afraid to ask. Also, be sure to ask your source if there's anyone else you should talk to. And as always, make sure you thank them for their time. Using the information from this video and the PDFs that I've uploaded to Edmodo, you should conduct your own interview this evening. Your source can be a family member, friend, teacher, coworker, teammate, etc. And your goal is to find out something interesting that you didn't already know about this person. You should compile a list of thought-provoking questions before you interview your source. You should also email those questions to me before our next class meeting. When you interview your source, be sure to videotape them according to the guidelines that I've posted on Edmodo. Once you've completed filming with your source, thank them and then email the video to me at sledford@mercyjaguars.com. Good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.